Japan, 1984. Neon bleeds into rain-slick streets. Vending machines glow like watchful sentries, and the whole country hums with the steady rhythm of order. Trains run on time. Salarymen march in gray tides. Mothers pack lacquered bento boxes while children race to corner shops for sweets they trust. Pocky sticks that snap like twigs. Glossy caramels that cling to teeth. Sugar that tastes like Saturdays. It is a nation of rituals. Shoes neatly placed at the door. Umbrellas stacked by the threshold. Tea cooling on tatami mats as evening news anchors smile across the airwaves. Life feels predictable, safe. And then silence breaks. In a newsroom, one thin sheet of paper slides across a desk. The words are sharp, deliberate, mocking. The voice in the ink feels confident, cruel, almost amused. At the bottom, a signature lies like a knife placed carefully on a table. The monster with 21 faces. The message moves like contagion, through newsrooms, into police precincts, onto the shelves of supermarkets where fluorescent lights never sleep. It whispers one possibility, so poisonous it spreads faster than any chemical that sweetness itself can kill. Parents snatch snacks from their children's hands. Delivery lorries idle at the curb, drivers afraid to unload. Executives stare at telephones that refuse to ring with the one thing that clarifies a crime: a price. Because this is not about ransom, not yet. It is about power, about theater, about a nation discovering that fear can be manufactured more cheaply than candy. Hold on to that thought. Because before the letters, before the threats, before the shelves went bare and the nights felt longer than they should, there was a house in Osaka. Steam curled over a quiet bath, and a door, just one ordinary door, waited to be opened by hands that did not belong there. March 18th, 1984. Nishinomiya, part of the Osaka-Kobe region. The Izaki family home glowed like any other in the neighborhood. Warm light spilling across manicured gardens, laughter soft behind paper screens. Inside, Katsuhisa Ezaki, president of the confectionery giant Ezaki Glico, lowered himself into his evening bath. Steam fogged the mirror, water lapped gently against porcelain. For a few fleeting minutes, the man whose company fed millions could close his eyes and imagine the world outside was quiet, safe. But beyond the walls of his home, shadows were already moving. Two masked men, dressed head to toe in dark clothes that seemed to swallow the light, approached with precision. They did not begin with Ezaki's house. They began with the house next door. Inside lived Ezaki's elderly mother. She was startled by the sound of the line being cut, the sudden silence of her telephone, the wire curling at her feet like a severed vein. Before she could cry out, the men bound her with the very cords they had sliced. Their demand was simple, chilling: the key to your son's house. Terrified, she obeyed. She was never their target, only the doorway. Minutes later, the men slipped across into the Ezaki residence. Mikiko, Katsuhisa's wife, froze as strangers burst into her living room. Their 7-year-old daughter whimpered before a rough hand silenced her. Both were tied swiftly, efficiently, as though these men had rehearsed every movement. Mikiko pleaded. She offered money, any sum, any amount, desperate to shield her child. One of the intruders leaned close, his reply curt and unsettling: "Money is irrelevant." That phrase hung in the air like a riddle carved in stone. From his bath, Ezaki heard nothing until the room filled with unfamiliar footsteps. Dragged naked into the cool night, his body steaming in the air, he was blindfolded, bound, and forced into the back of a waiting car. The familiar safety of his home was replaced by suffocating leather seats and the low hum of the engine. Tires whispered against asphalt as the car pulled away. Behind, his wife and child remained tied helpless in their living room, his mother still bound with her own severed wires. And in that moment, Japan's most unusual crime began, not with ransom, but with silence. The car slipped out of Nishinomiya's quiet streets and into the skeletal edges of the city, where warehouses loomed like watchmen and lamplight fell in lonely circles across the tarmac. Inside, Katsuhisa Ezaki sat bound and blindfolded, every bump in the road driving the ropes deeper into his skin. He could hear little but the hum of the engine and the occasional murmur of voices he would never recognize again. Hours stretched like days until, at last, the vehicle came to a halt. Dragged across gravel, pushed through a heavy door, Ezaki was left in the hollow belly of a warehouse. The air stank of rust and damp concrete. Pipes dripped somewhere in the darkness. When the door slammed shut behind him, the echo rang like a final judgment. Naked, cold, tied to a post, he was not being held like a valuable hostage. He was being discarded, left to wait. For most kidnappings, the script is familiar. A phone call within hours. A ransom carefully stated. Proof of life demanded, negotiated, exchanged. But here, nothing. No letter, no call, no demand at all. The silence was more frightening than any threat. Hours blurred into days. The floor leached the warmth from his body. Hunger clawed at his gut. His mouth cracked with thirst. In the blackness, Ezaki's thoughts circled endlessly. Why? What do they want? Why am I still alive? On the third day, instinct overcame despair. He twisted, strained, pulled against the cords until his skin split raw. Every movement sent fire through his muscles, but at last the ropes slackened. One wrist slipped free, then the other. With ragged breath, Ezaki staggered to the door. By some miracle or some design, it was not locked. With trembling hands, he pushed it open. Night air rushed in, cold and sharp, and for the first time in 3 days, he saw the stars. Barefoot, half-crazed with exhaustion, he ran. Across gravel lots, past the silent hulks of factories, until headlights sliced the dark, and he stumbled into the road, waving desperately for help. Against all odds, Katsuhisa Ezaki had escaped. Relief should have ended the story, but this was only the prologue, because while the president of Glico was free, the company, and soon the entire nation, was about to be dragged into a nightmare far darker than one man's abduction. Relief swept through Japan like a sigh when news broke that Katsuhisa Ezaki had escaped alive. The press hailed his survival as miraculous. The police, still baffled, quietly hoped the ordeal was over, but the shadows were not finished. They had only begun to stretch. Weeks later, flames tore through a car park belonging to Glico. Rows of company vehicles buckled under the heat, windows bursting, tires shrieking as black smoke curled into the night sky. The fire was no accident. Investigators quickly confirmed arson. Yet before the ashes had cooled, another site went up in flames. Another fleet of cars reduced to twisted shells. Inside Glico, the panic was growing. This was no longer about one man. It was about the company itself. Executives whispered of sabotage. Employees felt watched. The air inside offices turned heavy with unease. Then came the acid. In one of Glico's buildings, staff discovered a tub filled with hydrochloric acid, left as casually as if it were cleaning fluid. It was strong enough to scar skin, burn through concrete. It was never used. It did not need to be. Its very presence was the message. We can reach you anywhere. But the true voice of the threat came not through fire or acid, but through words, neatly typed, deliberate, laced with ridicule. A letter arrived, addressed to the police. To the Japanese police fools, are you stupid? There are so many of you. What on earth are you doing? If you are real pros, try catching me. Signed at the bottom, the monster with 21 faces. The name was lifted from fiction, a villain of Japanese detective novels, the fiend with 20 faces. By adding one more, the writer claimed superiority, infinite disguise, a phantom whose face could never be fixed in memory. The police bristled. The public stared at headlines in disbelief. This was no ordinary criminal. This was someone who wanted to be seen, to be heard, to be remembered. And the taunts were just the beginning. If the fires had rattled nerves, what came next shattered them. Another letter arrived, and this one carried a threat that reached far beyond Glyco's boardrooms. The monster declared that he had laced sweets with potassium cyanide. Your products are poisoned, the letter warned. Shoppers will die without knowing why. In a country where snack aisles were as familiar as morning trains, the effect was immediate. Supermarkets emptied as though struck by plague. Parents ripped sweets from their children's hands and hurled them into bins. Convenience stores shuttered shelves in panic, afraid of what might already be hidden among the wrappers. Television anchors repeated the words with grim voices. Newspapers splashed the warning in bold black print. The image of a poisoned pocky stick burned into the public mind. Candy, the symbol of childhood joy, was now a potential weapon. Inside Glyco, chaos reigned. Executives had no choice but to order a recall of every single product. Tens of millions of items disappeared from shelves in a single night. Conveyor belts that had run for decades ground to a halt. Warehouses filled with stock destined for homes across Japan were reduced to waste. 450 part-time workers were dismissed in the panic. In weeks, the company hemorrhaged over 13 billion yen, around 130 million US dollars. And yet, when investigators tested the recalled sweets, not a single trace of cyanide was ever found. No poison, no contamination. The shelves had been cleared, the trust had been shattered, but the threat itself was empty. The monster had discovered something far more devastating than chemicals. Fear alone could poison a nation faster than any toxin. Across playgrounds, whispers spread, "Don't eat the pocky." Housewives examined wrappers twice, scanning for punctures. Children dared each other to eat unopened packets, the rumors spreading faster than truth. For the police, the question became unbearable. If there was no poison, what did the monster want? Money? Revenge? Chaos for its own sake? The letters did not clarify. They only mocked. And in that uncertainty, Japan trembled. Because uncertainty can spread wider than fire and strike deeper than any blade. By late 1984, the monster had turned from tormenting Glico to a new victim, Morinaga, another confectionery giant. The threat was direct. A ransom was demanded. If the company failed to pay, their reputation, like Glico's, would be destroyed. For the police, this was the chance they had been waiting for. The monster had set terms, fixed a date, and chosen a location for a drop-off. Thousands of officers mobilized. Surveillance was arranged with military precision. Helicopters idled on standby. Unmarked cars dotted the highways. Cameras were hidden in briefcases, vans, even disguised as commuters waiting at rest stops. This was their moment to catch the phantom. And then he appeared. A man driving a gray Toyota, wearing a baseball cap and dark glasses. Calm, composed. Nothing about him seemed hurried. But those who saw him noticed one detail above all: his eyes. Piercing, angled, sharp, predatory. Witnesses would later call him the fox-eyed man. Police tailed him along the Meishin Expressway for nearly an hour. He never sped. He never panicked. He seemed to know he was being watched, and yet treated the chase like a game. At one rest stop, he pulled in, parked, and calmly ate a meal as undercover officers hovered nearby, pretending to do the same. When he finally drove off, the officers followed. And then he vanished. Whether he slipped into the forest, switched cars, or simply outplayed the swarm of men chasing him, no one could say. By the time the operation ended, the police were humiliated. The ransom was never collected. The monster's letter soon followed, mocking them for their failure. "Nice try," it seemed to grin from the page. "Better luck next time." The fox-eyed man became a symbol. His sketch appeared in every newspaper, his gaze frozen in ink, haunting readers across the nation. Was he the mastermind, a courier, or just a decoy planted to distract? No one ever learned his name. The police had come closer than ever before, and still the monster slipped away. The mask of 21 faces had revealed a fragment. But was that fragment truth, or just another disguise? The fox-eyed man had slipped through their fingers, and the sting of failure spread through every police station in Japan. Newspapers mocked the investigation daily. Television bulletins replayed grainy footage of rest stops and sketch artists' drawings as though to remind the nation of what had been lost, their confidence in the men sworn to protect them. But while the police struggled, the monster sharpened his cruelty. Letters arrived more venomous than before, typed lines dripping with mockery. He no longer threatened only companies. He threatened the very pride of the police. "Shall I kidnap the head of the prefectural police next?" one note teased. Even as Morinaga and Fujiya braced themselves for poisoned product threats, the letters turned into theater, an elaborate humiliation staged in black ink. Each taunt seemed calculated to drive the knife deeper into the nation's sense of order. For Superintendent Shoji Yamamoto of Shiga Prefecture, the humiliation became unbearable. For months, he had carried the weight of failure, thousands of officers deployed, millions of yen spent, and still the monster mocked them freely. Each letter seemed written for him personally, its laughter cutting through every failed stakeout and dead-end lead. In a culture where honor was bound to duty, Yamamoto felt the shame like poison in his blood. On the 7th of August, 1985, he walked alone into a forest near Lake Biwa. The summer air buzzed with cicadas. The lake lapped gently in the distance. Carrying his service revolver, Yamamoto raised it to his head and pulled the trigger. He was 58 years old. The news broke like a hammer strike. Japan grieved for a man who had given his life to law enforcement, only to be undone not by a gunman or a criminal's bullet, but by the weight of a faceless tormentor. And then the monster wrote again. The words were cruel, mocking, unforgettable. Yamamoto died. How foolish of him. But he died like a man. We give our condolences. We will stop torturing food companies. It's fun to live a bad man's life. Monster with 21 faces. It was the cruelest act yet, a suicide turned into a curtain call. And in those lines, the monster hinted at departure. But was it a farewell or just another smirk from behind the mask? After Superintendent Yamamoto's death, the letters stopped. For over a year, they had arrived with cruel precision, mocking the police, taunting executives, terrifying families. Now, suddenly, there was silence. No fires, no acid, no poison threats slipped beneath newsroom doors. Newspapers that once splashed the monster across front pages shifted their attention elsewhere. Television anchors moved on to new scandals. But silence is not the same as peace. For the police, the quiet was unbearable. They had poured themselves into the case with unprecedented force. More than 28,000 tips had been received. Over 125,000 suspects interrogated. Executives, delivery drivers, even police officers themselves. The case files stacked so high they resembled towers of wasted hope. And still, nothing. No face to match the sketch. No fingerprints. No voices. No confessions. Even the fox-eyed man, the one tangible glimpse of the phantom, had dissolved into myth. Investigators replayed the chase over and over, convinced they had been just steps away from ending the nightmare. Some swore the monster was a single genius. Others believed that 21 Faces was literal, a collective swapping identities, moving like smoke between roles. If it was a group, how had no one slipped? How had no loose tongue, no drunken boast, no whispered rumor ever exposed the truth? As the months passed, Japan began to breathe again. Children returned to the sweet aisles. Factories restarted their conveyor belts. The fear that had once hung over every wrapper slowly gave way to something else. Forgetting. Because forgetting is easier than living with questions that can never be answered. But for the police, there was no forgetting. Yamamoto's ghost lingered in every empty briefing room, every dead-end tip, every unanswered file. The monster had not been caught. He had not been defeated. He had simply walked away on his own terms, as though the entire campaign had been nothing more than theater. And that may be the most haunting truth of all. You can catch a thief, you can jail a murderer. But how do you close the case on a ghost who decides when the curtain falls? Even as the monster's voice faded, his shadow clung to Japan. Families returned to supermarkets, but the trust was gone. Every crinkle of a wrapper sounded sharper. Every sweet in a child's hand carried an invisible question mark. Candy, the most innocent symbol of joy, had been rewritten as something fragile, something that could turn lethal without warning. This was no longer just a corporate scandal. It was a cultural scar. On playgrounds, rumors spread faster than facts. Children dared each other to eat unopened packs of Pocky, whispering that poison still lurked inside. Housewives inspected seals twice, eyes scanning for punctures that weren't there. Shop aisles, once bright and bustling, seemed subdued, quieter, as though the monster's silence still walked between the shelves. For the police, the memory festered into shame. Yamamoto's suicide had become an unspoken indictment of their failure. Officers who had worked the case admitted years later that the monster seemed always one step ahead, anticipating their every move. The fox-eyed man became a ghost story passed down in police academies, a reminder of the one who slipped away. The media couldn't let go either. Documentaries replayed the same sketches, the same stakeout footage, the same letters read aloud by somber narrators. Each retelling ended the same way. no arrests, no resolution. The monster had slipped through history's cracks, leaving behind nothing but the echo of laughter stamped in type. And for the companies, Glico, Morinaga, Fujiya, the wounds cut deeper than lost revenue. To be chosen as a target was to stand helpless while your reputation, your bond with the public, was eaten away by fear. Executives described sleepless nights, waiting to open the morning paper and see if another letter, another humiliation, was waiting for them. The monster may have fallen silent, but silence itself became his legacy. To this day, when Japanese citizens whisper about 1984, when they murmur the monster with 21 faces, voices still lower instinctively, as though the phantom might be listening, waiting, ready to slip on another mask. With the trail cold and the letters long ceased, only speculation remained. Who had worn the mask of the monster with 21 faces? Who had humiliated a nation and then vanished without trace? Theories multiplied, each one trying to fill the silence left behind. The first suspect was the Yakuza. Japan's organized crime syndicates had their hands in gambling, construction, extortion, every shadowed corner of the economy. The precision of the kidnapping, the fires, the acid left behind like a calling card, it all carried the smell of professionals. But there was a flaw. The Yakuza lived by profit, payment for protection, debt collected in blood. Yet the monster mocked money as irrelevant, abandoned ransoms, and walked away from millions in untouched cash. For men driven by wealth, this behavior was senseless. Others suspected corporate sabotage. Glico was a titan, its logo stamped across sweets, dairy, ready meals, a brand that dominated shelves. What better way to topple a giant than to rot its reputation from the inside? Rivals could never admit it, of course, but some believed the monster's campaign had handed competitors a silent fortune. Yet no firm ever slipped, no rival was caught boasting, and no evidence ever tied the threats to business espionage. Within police circles, a darker idea grew. What if the monster was not one man, but many? A collective, perhaps ex-military, perhaps former officers who knew the playbook, trading faces and roles as easily as masks. This could explain the inside knowledge, the uncanny timing, the way the letters seemed to anticipate strategy. But if that were true, how had no one broken ranks? No careless boast in a bar, no whisper to a lover, no leak over decades. That silence seemed almost supernatural. And then there were the truly chilling whispers. Foreign intelligence, a rogue psychological operation, a test designed not for ransom, but for data, for proof of how easily fear could destabilize a modern society. In that light, the monster's laughter was not merely mockery, it was triumph. None of these theories ever settled the question. That may have been the monster's greatest victory. By vanishing, he became immortal, a riddle with no answer, a mask that could be anyone, and once a mask can be anyone, it can never truly be removed. The monster with 21 faces may have vanished, but Japan did not return to what it was before. His campaign was short in the measure of history, barely more than a year of kidnappings, fires, and letters, but the shock waves rippled for decades. This was not just crime, it was transformation. For companies, 1984 became a lesson carved in steel. Glico and Morinaga were forced to rebuild from ashes, but the entire food industry was remade in their shadow. Packaging was redesigned with seals that could not be tampered with unnoticed. Security was tightened across production lines. Public relation strategies were rewritten with one phrase in mind: what if it happens again? Even today, executives look back on that year as the moment they realized that reputation, so carefully built across generations, could be destroyed overnight by nothing more than rumor. For the police, the monster became a permanent wound. Training academies turned the case into cautionary study. The failed stakeouts, the taunting letters, the glimpse of the fox-eyed man. New recruits learned not just about procedure, but about humiliation. They were warned never to repeat the mistakes that cost Superintendent Yamamoto his life. His suicide, still spoken of in hushed tones, became a symbol of how deeply shame can cut when justice fails. For ordinary people, the monster turned daily life brittle. A bar of chocolate, a pack of Pocky, a bag of caramels. Things that had once been comfort suddenly carried suspicion. Parents who lived through those days still recall being told not to eat sweets, long after the police had declared them safe. Even when the danger was gone, the fear lingered, passed down like an inheritance. And beyond Japan, the monster became a case study for criminologists and psychologists worldwide. A campaign with no confirmed casualties, yet one of the most effective extortions ever staged. He had proven a terrifying truth. Violence does not need blood. Violence can be measured in trust lost, in confidence shattered, in markets collapsed, in lives broken by fear alone. The monster's legacy was not who he was, but what he showed Japan, that a faceless enemy could destabilize an entire nation and then disappear into smoke, leaving only echoes behind. And so we return to the beginning. The letter slid across a newsroom desk, the voice in the ink steady, amused, cruel. The monster with 21 faces came into Japan's story like a storm, and then just as suddenly disappeared into silence. No arrests, no trial, not even a deathbed confession. The files still sit unsolved, paper yellowing with age, sketches of the fox-eyed man fading like ghosts on a wall. All that remains are the echoes of laughter typed in black ink. Nearly 4 decades on, speculation keeps the phantom alive. Retired detectives confess that the case still haunts them. Writers reimagine the story, feeding the legend. Families tell their children, "When I was young, candy could kill you." The monster never needed to strike again. He lives on every time his name is spoken. And perhaps that was his greatest crime. Because here lies the true horror. The monster didn't vanish. He was never found in the first place. Was he one man with fox-like eyes, forever smirking at a nation that failed to catch him? Was he 21 people, each wearing a mask for a moment before passing it on? Was he a saboteur, a syndicate, a spy, or just an ordinary man who learned how to wield fear as a weapon? Every theory adds another mask, and the more masks appear, the more the monster becomes not a man, but the embodiment of the question itself. Japan learned something it will never forget, that a country's greatest vulnerability is not its borders, nor its banks, nor even its police. It is trust, the trust between companies and consumers, the trust between citizens and the state, the unspoken belief that life will continue in its orderly rhythm. The monster shattered that trust with nothing but words, then walked away before anyone realized the performance was over. And so the hook remains unresolved, because it cannot be resolved. The monster, with 21 faces, was never unmasked. His laughter still echoes, not because of what he did, but because of what he proved that sometimes the most terrifying monsters are the ones we never catch. If you've stayed with us this far, you're one of us. Subscribe now to Mind Veil and step deeper into the shadows with us every week. Thanks for lifting the veil with Mind Veil. Until the next enigma, question every letter, every face, and every shadow.